Good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining today's webinar. I'm Michael Kelly. I'm part of the science team here at CureDuchenne, and it's a pleasure to welcome and introduce the team from ITF Therapeutics, a new division of italfarmaco, to update the community on DUVYZAT and their plans to launch the product in the US in the third quarter of this year. As you're aware, the FDA approved DUVYZAT in March for the treatment of Duchenne in patients 6 years of age or older, independent of their genetic mutation. And I expect this drug will become an important treatment option for patients when launched. The approval was a milestone for both the community and italfarmaco, who have spent more than a decade developing DUVYZAT. Now, before I hand it over to Matt Trudeau, the General Manager of ITF Therapeutics, I have some general housekeeping before we get started. Today's webinar is being recorded and will be available as a resource for the community on CureDuchenne's website. And two, we'll be taking questions from the audience during the session today. So without further delay, I'm delighted to invite Matt to take it from here.
Thanks. Thanks, Michael. I appreciate the introduction. Hello, everybody. It's wonderful to meet you. My name is Matt Trudeau. I'm the General Manager of ITF Therapeutics, which, as Michael said, is a subsidiary, the U.S. subsidiary of italfarmaco. Before I talk about us and talk about DUVYZAT, I first want to recognize this community and thank CureDuchenne for welcoming us in to share news today and be available to answer questions. So I'm joined by Paolo Bettica, who is our Chief Medical Officer, who spent the better part of a decade developing DUVYZAT for Duchenne muscular dystrophy, and he'll walk this community through the data and be available to answer questions about the data and potential interpretation of it. I'm also joined by Caroline Allen, who's our head of patient advocacy. So as a team, we're thrilled to represent a broader organization today as we look to bring DUVYZAT to the U.S. Duchenne community. Today's focus is the U.S. market. We're very proud and thrilled to share news today about a new tool that's available to physicians and patients and caregivers in the U.S. The organization more broadly has filed in Europe. The MAA has been validated, so that review is in process. And the company is also moving with certain urgency to make the product available to markets outside the U.S. And Europe, and that will be communicated over the coming months. So today, I'm going to talk a little bit about italfarmaco and how ITF Therapeutics fits into it. I'll be brief. I'll hand over to Paolo, and he'll talk through the DUVYZAT data and share with you the development pathway, as well as some of the data points that may be useful as this community and caregivers and physicians think about appropriate treatment with DUVYZAT. Then I'll come back on the screen. I'll talk about our plans to make DUVYZAT available in the U.S., and then I'll turn it over to Caroline, who will talk about how we think about the community and how we intend to engage with the community, not just today, but going forward to listen, learn, and act as a member, or at least as a guest in this community. And then, as I said, first and foremost, we're here to be available to answer questions. I can't guarantee we'll be able to answer every question today, but I can guarantee that we will listen and respond, if not today, going forward. So thank you very much for the opportunity to be here. Let me tell you a little bit about ITF Therapeutics and what we're building in the U.S. First of all, we're very proud to be part of a larger organization. Italfarmaco it's a unique biopharma company headquartered in Milan. They are the parent company of ITF Therapeutics. It was founded in 1938, so it's almost an 80-year-old company with a fantastic legacy of bringing therapies to patients across 60 countries, 5 continents, serving thousands of patients every year with medicines. This is a new venture as we think about the U.S. The company is privately owned, so there's one shareholder, which means we're not necessarily beholden to Wall Street, and we act in the interest of the community as we bring this therapy forward. Importantly, this legacy of this company means we're not a startup in the U.S. We are part of a larger organization with very, very deep history and capabilities in quality, in manufacturing, in research and development. And so while we look today to bring DUVYZAT forward for this community, we're optimistic we can do a lot more good as we move forward over time and focused on rare disease. italfarmaco has been focused over 12 years on Duchenne muscular dystrophy, and as Paula will speak about in a few minutes, the better part of a decade on DUVYZAT in DMD. So this is a culmination of a tremendous amount of work, and it's not just italfarmaco. It's a broader community of physicians, and also the patient community was involved in the development of this particular asset for Duchenne muscular dystrophy. Now, ITF Therapeutics is a very, very young company. We were just founded 3 months ago. We're headquartered in Cambridge, Massachusetts, actually west of Cambridge. We're headquartered in Concord, Massachusetts, but we're in the biotech bubble where there's a tremendous concentration of talented folks that have great experience in rare disease. And our leadership team that we've recruited over the past several months is 100% focused on rare disease and 100% experienced in rare disease. And, what that means to us is that as we operate, we know the patient community is critical to provide us insights and help us think through how to bring therapies forward to patients, and is central to what we do. And then, as I said, our initial program is DMD, and we're not done. We have a lot more to do for DUVYZAT as we continue to work to qualify the value of the product more broadly. But then we're also bullish that we can do a lot more good beyond DMD as we focus on rare disease exclusively in the US. So next slide, thanks. So what are we excited about today, and particularly for this call, is that, from the earliest phases, DUVYZAT has been developed with the community. And Paula will speak about that in a few minutes, or a few seconds, actually. But we're so proud of this moment we have to bring a new tool forward to this community, a new FDA-approved therapy that has a very broad label, as Michael said, age 6 and over, without any restriction for genotype, without any restriction for ambulatory status, a twice-daily oral therapy that we think is going to be a very important tool for this community to consider management of disease over time. So with that, I think I'm going to hand it over to Paulo to talk about DUVYZAT.
Okay, thanks, Matt, and thank you to CureDuchenne for hosting this webinar. So if you can go to the next slide. So let me start talking about DUVYZAT by really reading the indication that was granted by the FDA to DUVYZAT. So DUVYZAT is indicated for the treatment of Duchenne muscular dystrophy in patients 6 years of age and older. So what you read here is really that DUVYZAT is the first non-steroidal drug that has been approved for the treatment of individuals with DMD 6 years and older, regardless of the underlying genetic variant. If you go to the next slide. So what is DUVYZAT? So DUVYZAT, the chemical name is givinostat, and it is actually an inhibitor of the histone deacetylase that are actually overworking in Duchenne. And this is actually due to the fact that the main controller, if you want, of the HDAC in the muscle is actually dystrophin, which, as you know, is absent in Duchenne. So although we do not know the precise mechanism that DUVYZAT exerts in Duchenne, we actually have a good understanding of what the mechanism of action might be, and I'm going to describe it in the next 2 slides. So if we can go to the next one. So as you know, the main cause of Duchenne is actually a genetic defect in the gene of dystrophin, which translates into lack of dystrophin. So the dystrophin actually has numerous roles in the muscle, and the most well-known is actually that of mechanical protection, where in essence dystrophin is acting like a shock absorber in the muscle. But another very important role that is maybe less known is that of if you're controlling the muscle repair system. And actually, at least part of this is done via the control of the HDAC. So when you are in a situation like Duchenne, where dystrophin is not present, on one hand, you have an increased damage of the muscle fibers, since you are losing the mechanical protection that dystrophin provides. But on the other hand, you also have an impairment in the repair of muscle. So if we look at a muscle biopsy in Duchenne, what we see an increase in muscle fiber injury. We see chronic inflammation. We see actually an impairment in the regeneration of the muscle regeneration mechanism. And also what we see is that the muscle is being replaced by fat or by scars. And actually this picture at the muscle tissue level is what is behind the progressive muscle weakness that is the key clinical feature in Duchenne. So if we go to the next one. So what we know is that, as I mentioned before, this impairment in the repairing system is actually, at least in part, due to an overactivity of HDAC. So when we administer DUVYZAT, what we are doing, we are modulating the activity of the HDAC. And this actually translates into less fiber damage, an anti-inflammatory effect, a stimulation of the muscle fiber regeneration, and overall a decrease in the scars and in the fat replacement. If we go to the next one. So DUVYZAT has been approved on the basis of the result of the EPI-D study, which was a randomized double-blind placebo-controlled study conducted for 18 months. So the individual with Duchenne in the study were followed up for 18 months. As you can see there, we enrolled 179 individuals that were actually randomized 2-to-1 to receive either DUVYZAT or placebo. And let me underline that actually DUVYZAT or placebo were administered on top of stable steroids. A requirement for the study was to be on stable steroids for at least 6 months. As you see in the slide, we have actually enrolled individuals that were male, that were 6 and older, with a mean age close to 10 years. And as I said, all the individuals had to be on stable corticosteroids for the full time, and they had to be ambulatory at study start. If we go to the next one. So the primary endpoint in the EPI-D clinical trial was actually the change after 18 months in the time that the boys needed to climb the 4 stairs. And actually, we selected the 4-stair climb because this is actually a measure of muscle function, and also is an assessment of a significant function that is needed for the daily activity. We then also measure other secondary endpoints, and let me underline in particular the North Star ambulatory assessment. As you probably know, the North Star is actually a scale that has been developed specifically to assess the function in Duchenne. And this is composed by 17 different items looking at different tasks and evaluates the overall function in these boys. And the primary analysis was actually conducted in a pre-specified population, part of the study, that was predefined based on the fat fraction in the vastus lateralis, so in a muscle of the thigh of the boys enrolled in the study. If we go to the next one, here you see the result on the primary endpoint on the 4-stair climb. And as you can see, both groups, the DUVYZAT and the placebo group, took approximately 3.5 seconds to climb the 4-stair at baseline. And then, as you can see in the placebo arm, the time to climb 4-stair increased by slightly more than 3 seconds. While if you look at the change in the DUVYZAT group, it was 1.25 seconds. The difference of 1.78 seconds was actually statistically significant. And this difference in decline of approximately 40% is also considered clinically meaningful if we look at the literature. Let me also underline that actually the result on the North Star were actually in favor of DUVYZAT, showing also in this case approximately 40% less decline in this secondary endpoint. If we go to the next one, I want also to underline that actually the EPI-D study was a phase 3 study that also evaluated the fat fraction in the muscle after 18 months. And as you can see in the placebo arm, the fat fraction increased by approximately 11%, while in the DUVYZAT arm, it increased by 7.5%. If we go to the next one. Yeah, let me make a few considerations regarding the EPI-D trial. So first of all, the EPI-D trial was one of the largest trials ever conducted in Duchenne. And it actually demonstrated a positive result in a test that I mentioned before. The Forster climb is actually relevant to assess the muscle function in Duchenne. It's important to remember that the results were achieved by administering DUVYZAT along with corticosteroid. And that obviously the result that we obtained were actually obtained in the population of mixed underlying genetic mutation. So these results are actually not dependent on any type of genetic mutation. If we go to the next one, here we are presenting the adverse reaction that were reported in more than 5% of the DUVYZAT treated patient. As you can see, in decreasing order, we have diarrhea, abdominal pain. We have a reduction in platelets, the thrombocytopenia, which is a pharmacological effect of this group of drugs. We have nausea and vomiting, an increase in triglyceride, the hypertriglyceridemia, fever, myalgia, rash, arthralgia, fatigue, constipation, and decreased appetite. I think it's important to make a couple of considerations also here. Firstly, that by, if you want, reducing the dose or in some cases temporarily interrupt the treatment, the majority of these adverse events could be controlled. And in fact, only 2% of the patients actually discontinued the study because of adverse reaction. Let me go to the next one. We also saw some signal of hypothyroidism and or increase in thyroid stimulating hormone. This was seen in 5% of the individuals treated with DUVYZAT compared to 2% of those in placebo. If we go to the next one. So let me end up by reading the important safety information that you see in the slide. So DUVYZAT, as we said, is an HDAC inhibitor indicated for the treatment of Duchenne muscular dystrophy in patients 6 years of age and older. In terms of important safety information, let me read the warnings and precautions. So hematological changes, DUVYZAT can cause dose-related thrombocytopenia and other signs of myelosuppression, including anemia and neutropenia. So the healthcare provider will ask to monitor platelets and may actually change dosage during the treatment. Increased triglyceride and increase in triglyceride can occur. Dose modification may be needed. Discontinuation may be needed. Gastrointestinal disturbances, adjust dosage if moderate or severe diarrhea occurs. Antiemetics and antidiarrheal medication may be considered during treatment with DUVYZAT. Discontinue DUVYZAT if the symptom persists. QTC prolongation, avoid use of DUVYZAT in patients who are at any increased risk of ventricular arrhythmias. Recommended evaluation and testing before initiation of DUVYZAT. So the healthcare provider will require that platelets and triglyceride be measured before the start of DUVYZAT. And the recommendation is to not initiate DUVYZAT in patients with a platelet count less than 150, and monitor platelets counts and triglyceride as recommended during treatment to determine dosage modification if dosage modification are needed. In addition, patients with underlying cardiac disease or taking concomitant medication that cause QT prolongation obtain ECG when initiating treatment with DUVYZAT during concomitant use and as clinically indicated. The most common adverse reaction, as we mentioned before, so the one that occurred in at least 10% of the DUVYZAT treated patients, are diarrhea, abdominal pain, thrombocytopenia, nausea, vomiting, hypertriglyceridemia, and pyrexia. And obviously, for any suspected adverse event reaction in the label, you have the number to call for to report the adverse event. And with that, let me turn it back to Matt for the remaining part.
Thanks, Paolo. I appreciate it. We're so pleased to be able to have completed a meaningful clinical study and to have met our primary endpoint for DUVYZAT. But it's really only meaningful when we get the data to physicians and this community to make informed decisions about what's appropriate, as well as making the product available through the supply chain and through the insurance pathway. So over the next few minutes, I just want to share with you our roadmap to making DUVYZAT available to patients and their families in the US. And then we'll be available, and then I'll turn it over to Caroline, and then we'll be available for questions. So, as I said, we're thrilled to be able to communicate meaningful results. But as we think about what comes next for DUVYZAT, it's launching it and creating access for patients is our North Star and what we're prioritizing. In order to get there, in the near term, we'll be launching communications to the healthcare providers so that they have the information they need, both efficacy and safety, to help the community make decisions about what's appropriate for care. Community engagement is going to be central to us, and you should expect us to communicate and expect us to listen. Today is one example, but we're thrilled to be here for CureDuchenne today and to be welcomed into this discussion. But community engagement is going to continue to be a part of what we do to communicate on next steps. And then also building out our team of experts and passionate advocates that care about getting this asset to patients in a responsible way as quickly as possible. And so what does that look like from a kind of arc of activity standpoint? We'll be engaging shortly with insurance companies to educate them on the product, on the disease, to ensure appropriate coverage and invest appropriately to maximize the opportunity for patients, to engage the healthcare community, the physicians, to make sure they have information on the profile of the product to make informed decisions, or to rather advise informed decisions. We'll continue to seek community feedback on the services and programs we're putting in place to remove non-clinical barriers and to support the patient community as they go through this journey, specific to DUVYZAT. And then also, as we look at launching the commercial product, it's a priority for us that patients that are on the clinical trial and the open label extension are not disrupted in any way. And so we'll look to convert those patients to commercial supply in a way that does not disrupt their access to DUVYZAT in any way. And then we are working towards a commercial availability during the third quarter of this year. And we'll be communicating more over the coming months as we tighten up that window for our launch date. So the priority for us is removing non-clinical barriers. If a patient family and a physician determine that DUVYZAT is the right product for that given patient, then we're going to do everything we can to remove non-clinical barriers. So that means that our priority is to create access for patients regardless of insurance coverage or affordability concerns. It's our goal to make DUVYZAT available to patients where we can in the US. We're currently developing a comprehensive suite of services for patients and their families to access DUVYZAT and to provide support as appropriate for those that are going through this journey. Our services will include dedicated care coordinators and financial assistance programs that are appropriate for eligible patients, again, in the interest of removing non-clinical barriers. We're also standing up a specialty pharmacy network that will provide DUVYZAT directly to the patient's home for administration in the home setting. And then lastly, at least on this slide, we'll begin to engage insurance companies in the near term, educating them on the clinical value of DUVYZAT for this particular community. So that's what we're stacking up against right now, or stacking up towards right now. And on the next slide, I'll tell you a little bit about the indication again, just to reiterate that DUVYZAT is a prescription medicine that's now indicated and approved for the treatment of Duchenne muscular dystrophy for boys and young men ages 6 and over, without limitation for genotype or ambulation. It is an oral medicine. It's a liquid oral medicine that's administered twice daily with food. It's now approved in the US, and we're looking towards our commercial launch during the third quarter of this year. And I want to share with you that we're all moving with urgency and a certain responsibility to make a product that we feel is an important tool available as quickly as possible. So as we move forward, we intend to communicate and communicate and communicate. And so we've established 2 websites that we think are important. One is our corporate website, which just went live about a week and a half ago. And we have FAQs on our products website as well on duvizat.com. Sign up on duvizat.com if interested for updates. We'll be sending out information to the community on availability milestones, on news regarding DUVYZAT, and we'll continue to share via CureDuchenne and with the organizations more broadly about availability of DUVYZAT in the US. So let me hand it over to Caroline and also just express how important the community is to us as we introduce Caroline.
Thank you, Matt, so much. And Paolo, and thank you to CureDuchenne and for all of you for joining us today. My name is Caroline Allen. I'm our Head of Communications and Patient Advocacy at ITF Therapeutics. And hopefully what you've heard today, you've gotten a good sense from Paolo on how DUVYZAT was studied in our pivotal trial. And you got to hopefully have a good sense now from Matt in terms of what our plans are to urgently bring this product to commercialization in the US. From my perspective, what I'm hoping to convey to the community today is really our commitment, and that is that we're here to work with you and listen to you. It is incredibly important to all of us at ITF Therapeutics that we're absolutely partnering with the community moving forward and working together as we're getting ready for the commercialization and then beyond. So what does that look like? Right now, we are in regular communication with advocacy organizations. We've been working closely with CureDuchenne since we started a few months ago, and certainly the italfarmaco team has been in constant contact with them as well over the years. We'll continue to work with advocacy organizations to provide community updates frequently, certainly over these next few months, but also moving forward. You can absolutely expect to start seeing us more at conferences. So we'll certainly hope to see many of you at the upcoming Futures Conference. But you will absolutely start to see us in the community, and definitely please reach out, speak to us. We want to hear feedback, the good and the bad. We know we're going to do our best to do everything as well as possible, but also understand that there might be some missteps. And so we certainly want to hear from you on what those are and how we can better address those and course correct as needed. We're going to be hosting some focus groups with members of the community moving forward. Again, looking forward to hearing more perspectives as we build out the organization. And we welcome for anyone to really reach out and so that we can hear from you, to contact us. Certainly, you saw the 2 websites that Matt mentioned. We'll give a QR code at the end of this presentation for you to be able to access both of those websites. I certainly encourage you, if you're open to it, to register on duvizat.com for updates. And then there's additional contact information for you to reach out to us with any questions that you might have as well. So please absolutely reach out. Please know that our commitment is absolutely to work with you and ensure that what we're doing is right for the DMD community. And thank you for all of the feedback that you've given us to date. We're continuing to make ourselves better, and that's a lot to do with the feedback we've received from you all. So thank you. So with that, I'd like to turn it back to Mike to open it up for questions from the community.
Excellent. Thank you, Matt, Paolo, and Caroline. Much appreciated. That was a great walkthrough and getting the community up to speed with all of the work that's been done in this program over the years. I'm going to start with some questions that's come up online, and I have a few others really just to clarify. Make sure people have a real understanding of this. Could you just comment again on the dosing frequency, the formulation with or without food, You know, how's that look, you know, for the drug use on a daily basis?
So the DUVYZAT is actually a liquid suspension. So it's taken daily, twice a day, in the morning and at evening. As Matt was mentioning, the recommendation is to take it with food. The recommendation is in particular to, if you want to counteract the DUVYZAT has a bit of a bitter taste. So if you actually take it with food, that actually disappears. So that is why we recommend it to take it with food.
Excellent. Thank you, Pablo. Is there weight limitations or restrictions with respect to dose?
So the administration of DUVYZAT is actually based on weight of the patient, but it's actually weight. I mean, we have in essence 4 weight bands that goes from 10 kilogram up to obviously more than 70 kilogram.
Mm-hmm.
So depending on the weight band the individual falls in, he will receive a certain dose, which is specified in the label.
Okay, thank you, Pablo. Just touching on this has been in individuals that have had a stable steroid background, and patients have a choice of steroids, some on prednisone, deflazacort, and now Agamree. Is there any difference or any recommendations? I'm going to assume that one can stay on any one of those steroids with this drug.
Actually, your assumption is correct, Mike. In fact, we have allowed any type of steroid that was obviously approved at that time when we conducted the study, being deflazacort, being prednisone or prednisolone. And also we allowed either daily or intermittent dosage. So as long as they had been stable, if you want, for the previous 6 months, and that was continued during the study, any one of these combination could be allowed. And I mean, our analysis did not show any difference depending on the type of steroids or steroid regimen the individuals were on.
Excellent. Thanks for that, Paolo. We actually anticipated my next question, which was different dosing frequency that patients choose. Yeah. Let's talk a little bit about your plans for patients younger than 6. You've obviously got a series of plans to make this available to a much wider range.
So let me tell you, we are actually starting. One has already started, and the second one will start in a couple of months. 2 additional studies. One, both of them are actually being conducted outside the US. One is in kids that are 2 years and up to less than 6 years. This is a study that will evaluate pharmacokinetic and safety in these individuals, in these kids. And obviously, based on these results, the plan will be to then go back to the FDA and potentially ask for an extension of the indication. The second study, which is a particular request of the pediatric committee of the European authority, is actually a study in non-ambulant boys 9 to 18 with Duchenne. And as I said, that will be conducted outside the US.
Yeah, I know that you've currently got data in older non-ambulant patients. Do you have a sense of the benefit risk profile in those individuals?
So as we mentioned at the beginning, the if you're an entry criterion for the EPI-D study was to be ambulant. Mm-hmm. However, as you might imagine, well, let me also add one information. All the boys that were in our phase 2 or phase 3 study actually transitioned to an open label extension study, which is still ongoing. And as a result of that, if we look at a cutoff, for example, of December last year, we had on average boys on treatment for 5 years with a maximum of actually more than 10 years. And as you might imagine, during this period, some of the boys actually became non-ambulant. But actually what we are seeing is, in essence, no differences in safety profile. And obviously, as the number of boys losing ambulation will increase, we can also look at milestone, for example, of upper limb. These are things that we will analyze in the future cutoff of this data.
Excellent. You actually, once again, anticipated my question. That was the study 51, and that is a long-term open label. So I'm
Yes.
particularly pleased to hear the data out of that.
Yeah. And let me add a couple of information here. So in total, we enrolled 222 boys in the study 51. And I'm pleased actually to report that I believe 189 are still on treatment as we speak.
That's
so
really
it's still
encouraging.
a very large number. Yes.
Yeah, it speaks to both the safety and tolerability profile of the drugs. Delighted to hear that. I know there's been a previous trial in Becker patients. Have you got any update in that? And particularly the question is, have you plans to actually expand the label into Becker individuals?
So the study in Becker, although it actually missed the primary endpoint, because we had histology as primary endpoint, but actually in the patient that we recruited, we did not see any change in histology. In the only parameter where we actually saw change in the placebo arm, where they actually had a decline, which was in fat fraction, the results were in favor of givinostat. So as you might imagine, at the moment, we are fully concentrated on Duchenne and to make sure that we can bring DUVYZAT to the Duchenne community as soon as possible. But certainly at the same time, we are actually evaluating potential other studies to be conducted in other dystrophies. So stay tuned, and hopefully we can have some additional news in the future.
Okay, this won't surprise you. It's really an expansion of the theme of this conversation. Have you considered the use of this in carrier females?
So I think the reply is similar to what I said before. So at the moment, obviously, the study is in male individuals, but obviously, as part of future expansion, this is certainly one thing we will look into. Yes.
Okay, thank you. There's a bunch of questions that have come in. This is not just a US audience this morning. We've certainly got questions asking about the approval strategy in Canada, in Europe, in the UK, in India. Is there any comments that you can throw in there that'll give people some insight, Paolo, into how the company's thinking about this?
So as was also alluded to by Matt before, we are currently under review by the European authority. And I think we'll communicate soon some evolution of this review. At the same time, we are actually looking at all the other countries. We are actually discussing and talking with different regulatory authorities to agree on the plan for expansion in other countries.
Excellent, thank you. The low-hanging fruit in this disease is questions that are always asked about combination therapies. You know, we've got a number of approved drugs now. Gladly, this is one of them. And how are you approaching that space, thinking about patients that have previously had gene therapy, or those that are currently on exon skipping, or even on exon skipping approved drugs? Is there plans to expand your thinking around this to that patient population?
So as we have discussed, obviously, in our clinical trials, the enrolled boys were on steroids, but actually we were excluding other drugs for Duchenne. Having said that, if you look at the indication, obviously, it does not prevent any potential combination. I think what we are saying is it should really be a conversation between the family and the boys and their healthcare provider to understand whether they are actually suited for potential combination.
That's a good answer. Is there anything that you know about a potential drug-drug interaction that exists in here that might preclude some families that just trying to give guidance to the community about anything that may be contraindicated?
So actually, we have conducted a thorough analysis of potential drug-drug interaction. And as you will see in the patient information, actually, there is actually no contraindication for other treatment to be administered with givinostat. So as far as if you're on the pharmacokinetic interaction, we don't see anything that precludes any co-administration.
Mm-hmm. Given that as patients age, dilated cardiomyopathy is always a concern. Patients are on cardiac meds. Is there anything that you can point individuals to where I've seen there's a risk of QTc prolongation. I'm going to assume that's at higher dose. Are other cardiac safety risks that patients need to be concerned about?
So firstly, let me underline one thing, which is that we have actually quite extensively assessed the cardiac function in our studies as a safety parameter. So we have actually measured EKG every 3 months, and we have actually performed an echocardiography every year. So the results are actually showing that there is, we have not seen any adverse event coming from either ECG or the echocardiography. So those results are pretty supportive of the lack of adverse event on the heart. Let me, comment a little bit more on the QTc prolongation. As you may know, as part of the registration, we are actually conducting a study which is called thorough QT study, which is in healthy volunteer, where not only one should test the therapeutic dose, but we are also have to test what is called a supratherapeutic dose. So we actually tested a dose which is 5 times larger than the dose that is given in Duchenne. And actually there we have seen some prolongation of the QT. Let me also underline one thing, which is that we have looked at potential adverse event related to QT, and there are predefined QT prolongation that become an adverse event, and we have seen none in Duchenne.
Excellent, thank you. Thank you for that. One other one that's just come up from the patient intrigues me, in that some older patients are on feeding tubes, and I'm wondering how that could deal with the administration of DUVYZAT.
So so at the moment we are actually we have not tested directly DUVYZAT in the feeding tubes. However, the data that we have is that, and being a suspension, is that it could potentially be used also via the feeding tube.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you. I've covered most of my questions and the general ones that have come across here. Matt, I'm going to hand it to you for a minute before I wrap up, but is there any final words from you?
Thanks, Michael. I'll just reiterate what has been said, that we're thrilled to be welcomed into this community and to play a role. And I want to communicate to this organization that we're moving with urgency to make the product available as quickly as possible. And you should expect to hear more from us over the coming months. But a wonderful session, and a big thanks to CureDuchenne for giving us this opportunity to communicate.
Well, I think that it's almost the other way around. Like, thank you to you for what you've done out there. Particularly thanks to italfarmaco as well as ITF Therapeutics for all of the work that they've done developing this drug with a very novel mechanism of action to treat Duchenne. I mentioned earlier that we know that the development timeline for this has been long, over a decade, and so we really appreciate not just the commitment of the company, but the commitment of the Duchenne patients in these clinical trials in order to get us to this here point today. And so we really look forward to the Q3 launch of this, where it's going to be available in the US and then following in the rest of the world. So thank you to all of you, and thank everybody else that's joined us today. I really appreciate it. And with that, we'll close down the webinar.
Thank you. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.